So to conclude with our first part on how the Cold War intensified, we're going to look at switch and look at what's been going on in the United States while this first part of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union has been going on. Everything up until this point has been what's been going on in Europe, what's been going on in Asia. Now we take a look at the impact at home. So what was it like to live in America during this new Red Scare? We had a Red Scare in the 1920s. Now it's here again. And so here's some covers that I found. Check these out. Really showing some of the paranoia in America about what would happen if communism were to come here. One of the first things I want to talk about is how we saw this return back to faith in the United States. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, he really wanted us to take a stand and show the world how one of the major ways that we were different from Russia, which has a very secularist government. So this is a quote from him. "Without God, there can be no American form of government, nor an American way of life. Recognition of the Supreme Being is the first, the most basic expression of Americanism. Thus the Founding Fathers saw it, and thus with God's help it will continue to be." So if America is going to win this ideological battle against what's better, our way of life or their way of life, he says it has to start with a recognition of God. So we're going to see some changes in American culture that are still with us today. One of the first things is President Eisenhower is going to establish a prayer breakfast. He is going to invite both sides of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, to come together, and there's a pastor there, and he leads the House. He leads Congress in prayer. Let's put our political disputes aside to focus on what's important, asking God to lead this country. And so here's another quote from him. "Faith is the mightiest force that a man has at his command. It impels human beings to greatness in thought and word and deed." And that's saying a lot. A general, a commander himself, saying that the most powerful force in my hand is my faith. It's under Eisenhower's presidency that we're going to see the national motto of America change. It used to be "E pluribus unum," out of many we are one. The new national motto becomes "In God we trust," and it's printed on our money as you see today. Our Pledge of Allegiance is also going to be changed one more time. Here on the right here, I have a series of how the Pledge of Allegiance has changed over time. But in 1954, again, faith being the most important thing to help us in this struggle against the Soviet Union, Eisenhower urges Congress to add "under God," and it is still there today. All right, so going back to the fear of communism, communists have always been in this country. If you look at the election map from 1912, you remember Eugene V. Debs in our study of progressivism in America. As a socialism, basically the same thing as communism, he got almost 1 million votes. So communism have always been present. It's just during this time period that it becomes a dirty word. Red, communist, commie, all of these are derogatory words. They're seen as the lowest of the low in society. Congress formed something called the House Un-American Activities Committee, and their job is basically what it sounds like, to root out and find people who may be committing un-American type activities. So during America, it's all aboard the national goal of being successful in this fight against the spread of communism. So if you're doing anything in any way that's seen as a disloyal or subversive activity, you could find yourself pulled up before this committee. And we'll talk about these cartoons. But in the process of trying to keep the country safe, a lot of innocent lives were ruined. Hollywood was an especial target of HUAC. A lot of Hollywood actors were accused of being communist or having links to communist or communist sympathies, and just the accusation alone was enough to ruin some people's careers and get them blacklisted. Nobody would hire them because they were thought to have communist connections. Check out this link for more information about HUAC. This is a good review question. So here are some good political cartoons that we're going to go over in class about HUAC. All of these drawn by Herb Block. So in this hysteria, looking under the bed for communists and communists around every corner, there were 2 spy cases that really stunned the nation. First off, the trial of Alger Hiss. Here we have Whittaker Chambers. He is a self-acclaimed communist. He worked for the Soviet Union and did spy for them, but he gave up also the name of his who he said he had been contacting in the United States, passing off secret information to a gentleman named Alger Hiss. This is Whittaker Chambers, the spy, who said he had been working with Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss denied Chambers' accusations. However, Chambers did produce some damaging, if circumstantial, evidence that Hiss had been involved with the Soviet Union, but the statute of limitations had already passed. It was so late you couldn't charge him for it. But Hiss was charged with perjury, which is basically, lying under oath. You knew something and you didn't say. He was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. This makes the country go wild because here's proof that there are spies here in our nation. The second big trial is that of the Rosenbergs. They were accused of selling secrets of the atomic bomb to the Soviet Union. Julius Rosenberg was accused of heading a ring of spies in the United States working with the Soviet Union. So here's a great video to get more details about Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They were electrocuted. The wife, Ethel, she was electrocuted as well because she was seen to have, been working with him. And some people said, that they were innocent and that it was just a cry, anti-Semitism. Some people in the American government just hated Jews. But information has come out, released just recently in the 1980s, I believe, linking them to really having given the Soviets information about our atomic weapons program in a series of documents called the Venona Papers. Now, this was the United States' effort to gather messages that had been being sent from Russian agents in the United States that they were sending back to Russia. And in it, there was information about the workings of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. So for the longest time, there was doubt in the air about whether or not they were really guilty. But the Venona Papers revealed the identity of lots of Americans who were spies for the Soviet Union. So check out this link for more information on the Venona Papers. Good review question. And finally, McCarthyism, the most famous anti-communist of them all. Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin. He kind of made his political fortune making himself out to be a defender of the American way, and everything he did, it was in the name of the American people and protecting them from communist infiltration. But he got kind of power hungry. All the attention and the lights on him kind of go to his head, and he begins to just willy-nilly accuse people of being communists without hard evidence, and it ruins their life again, because just the association, just people thinking that you have ties to communism is enough to damage a person's reputation. But Senator Joseph McCarthy was famous for having Senate trials and calling people up that, even, just had or disagreed publicly with with government policy, or, they just didn't toe the line 100%. That was enough to get you called up in front of Senator McCarthy in Congress. But where he pushed the envelope is where he accused even members of the Army, our armed forces, the Army, of having communist spies inside of it. He said that he had evidence of over 200 known communists working in our federal government, and when it was time to produce the cold hard papers, there was nothing hardcore. So here's some more political cartoons I found on that topic. Nothing of substance. For the longest, the American people, they claim to not have liked his tactics. It was almost a bully in the courtroom. That's not a decent way to treat people. But at the same time, no one really stood up against him because, they thought he was getting the job done. He was fighting on our behalf. So while they didn't like his tactics, they agreed with overall the message, the idea of what he was doing. So that's kind of how he's allowed to run away with all these power and accusing people and bringing them up before Congress or these hearings, but not really having any substantive evidence against them. So this is a cartoon representing the McCarthy Army hearings. Good question. So I think it'd be good to kind of compare and contrast how this Red Scare that we see during the 1950s is a lot of the same like we saw during the Roaring '20s after World War II. And we're going to end here before we finish this up by talking about culturally what was happening in America during the Red Scare.